So how did this exhibit come about?
Well, a friend of the museum's, a woman named Barbara Guggenheim, who lives in Los Angeles and is an art consultant, a member of our collectors group, called the director one day and said, you know, this idea has come up. Steven Spielberg and George Lucas have the most amazing collections of Norman Rockwell's work, and they might be willing to lend the collections or parts of the collections if you all would be interested in doing a show. Well, we were thrilled.
Yes.
Thrilled.
And some of the pieces in this collection are really important to them personally, like the diamond board piece, and there are a few other pieces like George Lucas's first piece that he ever collected of Rockwell's is in here. How many pieces do they have in their entire collection? So what does this represent?
I don't know. This represents a good portion of the collections.
And did you get to go in and look and stuff?
I did. They were absolutely amazing. They gave me lists of what they had and said I was welcome to choose whatever I thought would make a good show.
Wow. And how did you choose what was in here based on the telling stories and the connection to film?
We did interviews with both George Lucas and Steven Spielberg, and they talked about why they like Norman Rockwell, why these pictures matter to them, and particularly why they think they matter in a much larger sense. And one of the things they talked about was how cinematic Rockwell is in making his pictures, and the parallels between things like casting, you know, selecting exactly the right person, making sure they can make exactly the right facial expression. So there were a lot of parallels between what they do as filmmakers and what Rockwell did as a maker of, if you will, stories, but stories that only play out in a single frame. In fact, at one point, Rockwell said if he hadn't been an illustrator, he would have liked to have been a movie director.
And George and Steven said that he would have been awesome.
Awesome.
So, yeah, good for him. And this piece in particular is very obviously connected to the movies because it has Gary Cooper in it. And this was painted when he was living or visiting California?
It was. Rockwell went to California in early 1930. He was just coming out of a divorce. He was pretty down in the dumps. And he had a friend who lived out in Los Angeles who said, you know, come on out, we'll cheer you up, you'll have a good time. And when he got to California, he told his friend that he'd always wanted to do a picture of a glamorous cowboy being made up by, in his words, a hard-bitten little makeup man. So that's what we ended up with here. His friend took him to see the publicity director at Paramount Pictures, who said, Gary Cooper is just starting to film a Western called The Texan. Maybe he would be the perfect model. Well, of course, he was the perfect model. One of the things I love about the picture, and one of the things Rockwell did so beautifully, he gave you little contrasts. So each of the men has the tools, if you will, the tools of his trade. Cooper with a 6-shooter because he is a Western guy, a Western cowboy, and the makeup man with scissors and a comb in his back pocket. And they form this little V that then focus down on the cowboy boots and then reinforce the V, the pyramid V, that puts the faces and sort of expressions of these two men close together. I mean, it's a wonderful, wonderful picture of role reversal. Painting for an audience or with an audience in mind is not so easy because everything has to count. Every detail, you know, in this picture, the smeary chamois with rouge and lipstick on it, the way the light hits here, the shoulder, and the front, it's as though a movie light has been turned on over to the right. So it reinforces, it's very subliminal, but it reinforces the movie connection between Gary Cooper and this role that he's about to play. So Rockwell thought it all through. He made every brushstroke count, and he made every element in every picture count because he wanted to tell stories, and he wanted us to get them. And all we do is look. There are no clues. The paintings mostly don't have titles, or at least not titles that he added to them.
Who was it that was buying his work, his original work, back when he was painting as a commercial artist?
Rockwell didn't show his work a lot when he was working as a commercial artist. He gave a lot of the pictures away. Okay. So particularly in some of the drawings, you'll see an inscription in one of the corners that says, "To my friend so-and-so, with great affection, Norman Rockwell." So there wasn't a huge market because the work just wasn't out in circulation.
What do you think about the fact that so many people don't see even Rockwell, who's the top, the cream of the crop, as traditional fine artists because their work is created as part of their own movie campaign or to create book illustrations or something? What do you say to those people about this work?
Rockwell struggled with the idea. He said when he was in art school, he and a friend made a pledge to each other that they would never succumb to the financial lure of commercial illustration. Of course, by the time he was in his 20s, he was already a very successful illustrator for one of the country's leading magazines. I don't think the question of fine artist versus illustrator tells us much anymore.
I know.
The pictures are wonderful. Rockwell was he was a very fine painter. One of the things I've come to understand about Rockwell working on this exhibition is that there is a lot more than necessarily meets the eye. There is often something sort of funny on the surface. There's a humorous facade that attracts you to it initially. But the more you look, the more you realize that there are a lot of other things that he's talking about in these pictures, a lot of them connected with something that was going on at the moment that he painted it. Some of the pictures deal with larger ideas about humanity, about people, about tolerance and respect. So there are all sorts of sort of subtexts that when we look and think, make us realize how meaningful these pictures are. Some of them in the 1930s when they were painted, but also now.
And they're timely even now.
They're timely even now because the ideas are universal.
How much of the paintings that he created were from inside his imagination and already done? Because there's this mise en scène thing that he does, where he lays everything out. He has props, he has actors, he sets them all up just like a filmmaker would. How much of that is inside his head before the art actually before he even puts his paintbrush on the canvas?
It's all there before he actually begins to paint, but he had a very laborious process in working out how he got there. He'd start with ideas. He'd see something on the street. He'd see something that one of his kids was doing. There would be something that would prompt an idea. And then he'd start sketching, and he did fairly rough pencil sketches, small pencil sketches, as he figured out what the story was, how the narrative would play. And then he started figuring out what the characters should look like, who they should be, what kind of props would tell the story. And after really from the late 1930s on, when he moved to Vermont, he didn't have access to professional models really very easily anymore. So he was using, friends, neighbors, the friend's dog, the kids, whoever he saw on the street that had the perfect face. And so he started using photography. So he very often, there are dozens of photographs of some part of a set as he was working through how to make it right.
And tell the whole story.
And tell the whole story with only that handful of objects that's it.
Well, thank you so much for spending some time with me and talking a little bit about his connection to the movies.